Alchemy is an incredibly unique part of human history. As much as it is a forerunner to modern chemistry, it was also a spiritual journey, a way of studying the world that aligned with a specific moral point of view. Influenced heavily by Christian tradition and other occult schools of thought, the alchemist saw himself as the center point of a world of good and evil, and was focused upon attempting to solve the formula behind this world. There is little of alchemical study that is universal. Each alchemist had their own formulas and theories, and their own symbols for hiding their research. The teachings were passed by word of mouth, from teacher to student, and so various alchemical traditions would sprout up independent of each other, teaching their own version of how best to understand the world. Their understanding was limited, much of it informed by outdated science, but from those studies came real-world discoveries. But what the alchemist really wanted was never fully achieved. The great work, the magnum opus, or as it is most commonly known, the Philosopher's Stone. Understanding the stone as a physical object is far too simple. It was an ideal, a formula, a way of understanding the whole world. It had many names, but what it actually was the formula to perfection, creation, and eternal life. The alchemist believed the world was full of impurities, that death and decomposition came from these impurities. When exposed to air, metal rusts. Humans slowly age and die. In order to stop such things from occurring, the object in question had to be purified. For once the impurities causing such destruction were removed, the object would become what it was meant to be, the perfect form of itself. For metal, that was believed to be gold. For humans, it was the immortality of their forebears, believed to have been lost when Adam and Eve left the garden and were exposed to the impurities of the physical world. The Philosopher's Stone was not so much an object as it was a method of creation, the God formula, that would allow man to create perfection and deny death, simply by understanding what chemicals and combinations could destroy impurities. Gold was seen as the greatest representation of this success because it was immortal. Neither fire nor water could destroy it. It was God's metal, associated with the sun and the divine. It was believed that metals were like the seeds of plants, placed into the earth to slowly grow and transform into their perfect form, which was gold. The alchemist was simply figuring out how to speed up this process, to become closer to God and the power of creation. The center of this concept was the alchemist's idea of morality, which is part of what made alchemy so unique. Many of its scientific beliefs were informed by moral judgments. Certain metals or chemicals were considered morally inferior, as were certain life forms. Humans were the highest point of animal life, the most pure and closest to God. The alchemist made these judgments and associations based on his own meditation and perspective, creating a science heavily relying upon religion, superstition, and morality. The physical world was the world of immorality, represented by impurities, and thus it was the physical form which the alchemist struggled to learn how to erase. They believed that everything in the world was composed of three principles: spirit, soul, and body. It was the body's impurities that ruined the spirit and soul. The difference between soul and spirit was its origin. Spirit was unique to certain kinds of animals and creatures, the human spirit versus animal spirit, the unique qualities that made one a person. But the soul was the one thing, the primal element derived from the divine and present in everything. It was the spark of life, the tiny bit of God's light he imbued in all of us. Impurities kept this one thing from being more present. The more pure the object or person, the more of the primal element was present, the closer to the divine that it was. To perfect the craft of creation, it was believed the alchemist had to combine elements, because only God could create something from one thing or nothing. This process was often represented in imagery as a marriage or sexual union between the male and female, and the final product as a birth. Death and resurrection were also major themes. The idea being the original lesser material was destroyed or decomposed, only to be reborn as a perfect being. It's not hard to see Christian tradition's influence on these ideas, as Jesus himself went through such a transformation after all. Like many occult traditions, Silent Hill plays with the themes and imagery of alchemy, using them as backdrops to the larger story. The first game shows us Dahlia's store is called the Green Lion, named for an alchemy motif that represents the transformation of lesser metals into gold. In the school, a riddle involving the old man's hand in the alchemy lab is where a player uses a chemical to melt the hand and reveal gold. But the connections to alchemy go far deeper than it first seems. The clue is Dahlia's shop. Her storefront, her base of operations, is named for the process of creating gold, the ultimate goal of any alchemist, the transformation and power of creation. Dahlia wants that power, the power to create perfection. The cult shares a lot of traditions and values with alchemy. Like the alchemist, the order places moral value on the world and the people in it. They see Earth as a lesser place, a place of filth and sin. It is only through being cleansed that these impurities can be destroyed, and that cleansing comes from pain, suffering, and death. Like the alchemist of old, the cult sees death and rebirth as the path to perfection, to becoming closer to God. In fact, the myths of the cult present a world in which God does die. Humans create God, who then dies in service to them, promising to return. She is a goddess of the sun. In many ways, the story mirrors alchemical tradition. A human attempting to create perfection, represented by the divine and the sun, and the process to this creation is death and rebirth. But where alchemy and Christianity imagine imperfection as the source of death, the cult venerates death. In the myths, humans were originally immortal and suffered for it. When God came, she created death to set them free. Still, she further promised to create a paradise where there was no old age, implying possibly a world without death. These myths are somewhat vague, but still present a similar theme. The physical world we live in is imperfect and impure, but through the right applications of magic and science can be made pure. Those applications are usually not pleasant. Like the alchemist, the theme of 3 is incredibly important to Silent Hill. 3 essential elements make up all things, and in Silent Hill, 3 little girls are the focus of the story. Cheryl, Alessa, and Heather are all 3 essential pieces of one person who has been reborn into a new life. The 3 circles on the halo of the sun seem to reflect them, and the focus on the sun in general is similar to alchemy, where the sun was associated with divinity, gold, and the ultimate goal of the alchemist. The creation of the god who would bring paradise is seemingly an alchemical one. The halo of the sun, associated with the ritual in Origins, is covered in alchemical symbols, as well as runes with the names of Dahlia and Alessa on them. The girl is burned, her physical body being destroyed to allow for the purification of the soul. The union of demon and human creates new life, impregnating Alessa, just as the search for the Philosopher's Stone was often represented as sex and birth. In fact, it may be that alchemy is the core of the cult's faith, and could explain why so many various magical traditions and Christian history have been molded into a new faith, for that is what alchemy was at heart. A fusion of Christian faith, the Kabbalah, astrology and astronomy, magic and tarot, and so many other mythological traditions. The alchemist was, after all, assigning moral value to the world around him based on his personal experiences, and it came from all kinds of sources. In the artwork they used to represent their work, the alchemist used zodiac signs, mythological figures, Christian imagery, and magic tradition. The way the cult is an amalgam of historical and religious traditions reflects alchemy's myriad sources and inspirations. Where the alchemist wished to become like God, to obtain the power of creation similar to God, the cult wishes to summon God, to create her. The order uses similar schools of thought and ways of viewing the world to a different end. To them, the philosopher's stone, the perfect creation, is God. The great work of creating perfection is the work to create God. They are not trying to become like her. They are trying to give her new life. They've corrupted the alchemical tradition, where the alchemist sees themselves as students of the world, attempting to understand it to become closer to God. The cultists see themselves as the chosen few, meant to bring God to fix this broken world, in order to purify it to the form it was always meant to be. Paradise. Hello, and welcome to another live Silent Hill symbolism. I hope you enjoyed that. I tried to do a little more this week to give it a feeling of being like a prepared essay, kind of the illusion that it was prepared beforehand while still really kind of flying off the cuff here, reading the script aloud. It gives me a little more leeway. I don't have to line by line arrange the imagery and the visuals and edit things, and it takes quite a long time to do that. So this makes it a lot easier to balance out the workload. I hope y'all enjoyed it. Hello everyone. I see we have Akatsuki, Pablo, Zako, Kim, Quinn, Faku, Silent Leon. I think I saw Lobsoul, Jeff, lots of folks today. Thank you for joining us. This is a somewhat new subject for me. I have not researched alchemy too heavily in the past, and as I started researching it recently, I found a lot of interesting connections to the cult and to Silent Hill, and I wanted to explore that. Hello, Mizu and Phil, E.T., Kim, Sarah, lots of folks. Hey, Artemis. I'm glad folks seem to have enjoyed this video. It was fun to explore. There was always some themes of alchemy in the stories because Silent Hill likes to draw from a lot of different occult places. Silent Hill 1, like I mentioned, has the Old Man's Hand, where you kind of perform alchemy to get the gold medallion. The Green Lion store is a reference to alchemy, but the more that I read alchemy texts and the more I understood what it truly was, the more I realized alchemy as an idea seems really infused into Silent Hill and the Order. That said, there are some themes behind the idea of the Order that are also very Japanese. The ideas of purity and imperfection and impurity are also very much Shinto ideas and Shinto traditions, which is a huge part of the culture in Japan. A lot of their myths and stories deal with impurities causing disease and illness and tragedies. So there's some connections there, but that also exists very heavily in the ideas of alchemy, and I really loved the idea of the somewhat arrogant figure of the alchemist seeing themselves as the center of the universe and judging everything by their own personal moral scale, and the figure of like Dahlia and Claudia and how they very much do the same thing, that even though it's to a different end, they very much stand and see themselves and the cult at the center of the universe and judge it by their own moral viewpoint. And even within the cult, you see different people judging by their own moral viewpoint and seeing other members of the cult as being immoral because of that. I thought that was really neat. I have also been studying the Kabbalah, and there's some interesting ties there as well. I don't think it didn't feel quite as much like a one-to-one the way that the alchemy just clicked with me and the Order. It was very interesting. It just feels very similar, especially the idea of transformation through destruction. Because the cult, ultimately, their idea is that God is going to create paradise by destroying this world. It's what Claudia was doing, destroying herself to summon God. The fact that alchemists are using chemicals and science to a similar end of trying to destroy impurities to create perfection, that's what the cult does to a T, for sure. I have a few slides here, not too many. but just some interesting quotes that I pulled from the research I've been doing that I thought were really useful in understanding alchemy. It's something that I think is well known yet little understood, because alchemy is used through a lot of media, especially today. You think about Full Metal Alchemist, Harry Potter, lots of stories reference alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, but not a lot of people really seem to understand what alchemy was or how very different it was. So many different alchemists had different ideas about what they thought was the true way to the end goal. Some people thought there were 7 steps. Some people thought there were 12 steps. You had to do this or use this chemical. And because alchemists were quite literally islands, studying on their own, keeping their work secret, and not really communicating very heavily, especially early on, a lot of specific schools of thought came up in very different places. You don't really have a singular text for alchemy or a singular way. Every alchemist had their own idea about what was true. Kazune says, speaking as a Jewish person, I can confirm Kabbalah is really complicated. It is. I've been reading about the Kabbalah. I've been reading the Bahir. I probably am not saying that correctly. It's fascinating, and I truly love it. And you find a lot of things from the Kabbalah in other media sources. Alchemy is one place. A lot of occultists pull on the Kabbalah. And there's different versions of it to some extent that they tried at one point to give a different spelling to the word depending on whether they were referring to Jewish, the original Kabbalah, or the version that some Christian occultists kind of tried to tack on to their own studies. It's fascinating to read about, and it's really personally kind of informed some of my own understanding of Christianity, given that they're all kind of connected in a way. I don't connect Kabbalah to Silent Hill as much. I haven't seen as much. Like, it's obviously anything that has to do with the occult will have some connections there. But personally, I've been studying the Kabbalah for Persona, because Persona 5 just very heavily dives into the ideas of the Kabbalah, and I really can't wait to discuss that with you all when we finish Persona 5. Here, we'll go to another slide. I really, really have enjoyed studying alchemy, though. One of the things I really loved was the idea that they really truly thought that metal was a seed that grew in the earth, because as far as they were concerned, they dug and there was metal. Where did it come from? It must have grown out of the ground. In their minds, everything grew from something else. Nature was very simple, and everything was the same. Well, if plants grow from seeds and humans come from sperm, then obviously metal comes from seed, and everything is the same. And if we can just figure out the origin of that formula, well, then we figured out everything. We can cure disease, we can create gold, we can do whatever we want. It did attract a lot of charlatans, for certain. A lot of folks who, could promise rich folks that they could pull down the moon and do whatever, and as long as they were very smoke and mirrors kind of show, they could pull it off. But there were also a lot of folks that really did believe what they were doing. Most of those are going to be the folks that stayed in their little houses doing their research, not talking and sharing their information. The ones that traveled town to town, being very open and dramatic about their studies, were far more likely to be the charlatans. But there was a pretty steady mix of both of those in alchemical history. Hello, Sugar Snap. Thanks for joining us. We are at the end portion of the video discussing the topic today. I really am curious to kind of delve more into the later Silent Hill games and discuss how alchemy ties to them. I was really kind of focused thinking on the first game this time, just because it's the most obvious connection, is the fact that the first game deals very heavily with the ideas of transformation, and when you consider how Alessa becomes pregnant with the god, alchemy, a lot of alchemical studies and traditions imagined the creation of the Philosopher's Stone, the magnum opus, as being the marriage of 2 or 3 principles or elements, and it was often shown, there's one image I think I put in the video of a married couple about to walk into a maze, and so the idea that Alessa has essentially copulated and become pregnant, it's a very similar idea to the alchemy idea that we're going to marry these things. They're going to become impregnated and create the new perfect being. Especially because alchemy also says that destruction and rebirth is the source of the new perfect thing. I did find it interesting that Silent Hill's mythos specifically says that humans started out as immortals, because there's a lot of tradition and idea in alchemy that Adam is the first alchemist, Adam from the garden, and that when Adam and Eve left the garden and started eating food in that world and being exposed to impurities, they started to lose their large lifespans that you know in the Bible people lived for 1,000 years. The idea was that the impurities are what caused that, and so humans started immortal and lost it because of impurities. But in Silent Hill, humans started immortal and they hated it, and God caused them to lose immortality. And yet the story also says that later God was going to create a paradise with no old age. So I don't know if possibly that implies that the original immortality just meant that you existed forever in a hellish, like always aging, kind of fading away. It's a little vague and strange, the way that myths are. And I kind of like it for that. But it was an interesting change to see that death was considered a gift. And it definitely reflects the fact that the cult values death a lot. Yeah, immortality equals boredom. Well, I'm glad you like my videos, Sugar Snap. You should definitely play one of the games. I really enjoy them myself. Play Silent Hill 4. Don't listen to the naysayers. It's a good game. Well, if anybody has any questions or anything about anything Silent Hill related or alchemy related, please feel free. I will probably jabber on for another good 10 minutes or so. Alchemy is pretty wild and pretty interesting. Let me see if we go another slide. It's fascinating because it is described as the forerunner of chemistry. A lot of things were discovered through alchemy. I think distillation was one of them, was discovered by an alchemist trying to figure out how to create gold. But it is also very heavily an ethical and moral tradition. It is a hard science and a soft science in a way. It's almost a religious experience because alchemists were very, very much influenced by their religious and moral traditions. They would cite the Bible as a source for their scientific theories, which is not the most useful thing to do when you're a scientist. But, I mean, from their point of view, the Bible was the word of God. It was law. It had to be true. I'm so glad that you like my videos, Artemis. Thank you. Oh, I totally get that, Sugar Snap. Half the reason I've changed my video to these type of essays is good old ADHD and the depression that comes from not talking to people when you're in quarantine. So this is definitely a lot more fun, and I think we're going to keep doing it this way. We had a few hiccups today. I kind of smoothed out some things, but I left Pippin in the room. I don't know if you noticed at one point there was a bit of a hiccup. I think I stumbled and then I had to pause and scroll back up because Pippin jumped on the keyboard and then on my shoulder. She's a little jerk. She knew I was doing something and she decided to get in the middle of it. But anyway, yeah, it's very interesting to me learning how unique alchemy was in the sense of it's not, what you would think of as a science built upon observing the world. To some extent it was, but it was also, they allowed themselves to be influenced by things from the Bible, from just what they morally thought was true, that they could look, the noble gases, they call them noble gases because they were considered morally higher than other base metals, were considered morally inferior. And a lot of this idea also was very heavily associated with the Divine Comedy and ideas of how the universe was arranged. The thought was that the soul originated in heaven, and heaven was the sphere above all the planets and the stars and everything above us, and that it would descend through all the planets, and as it did, each planet gave it a specific impurity. When it would arrive to Earth and become part of a physical body, it would gain all these impurities from the planets. They were also associated with specific metals and gases, I believe. Let's see. Huh. I have never heard of breatharianism. I probably didn't say that right, but that's interesting, Phil. The idea impurities in earthly nutrition reduce their longevity might have some parallels in breatharianism, the belief people can subsist off divine energy and not need food or water. Interesting. Yeah, there is a lot of ideas about how and where you became impure, but usually it had a lot to do with being born into the world, which I think the cult also has some ideas about the fact that just existing physically in this world is exposing you to sin and impurity, which is probably why they like to kill everyone, because in their minds you're being freed from your impurity, from the nastiness of the world and the suffering of the world. Hello, Lucina fan. For one, great name. And I've played all of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and we actually did a live discussion of it last week. That should be in the Symbolism playlist if you want to check that out. I really loved that game quite a lot. I'd also streamed it entirely. That's in the Final Fantasy streaming playlist if you want to check that out. It was a great game. You should definitely try it if you haven't. Let's see if I have any other interesting things I can share from Alchemy before we close up. And if anybody has any questions on the subject of Alchemy or Silent Hill or how they connect, please feel free to ask them, and then we'll close up. Let's see. Oh, here's a list of so the Halo of the Sun, for one, being a reference to the sun, and the sun being so important to alchemy, that's one thing, but it also has a lot of alchemical symbols. Specifically, the inner circle has a bunch of seemingly random symbols. The wiki lists them as the symbols, the alchemical symbols for aqua regia, glass, I probably said that wrong, and someone in the comments is going to tell me, beeswax, borax, decompose, water, arsenic, lime, a lot of various things that almost read like a list of ingredients maybe, or things that need to be done for the transformation, which I thought was really interesting. Also, the symbol is full of zodiac signs and other things like that, but those are also symbols that were used heavily in alchemy in their the artistry that they used to hide their secrets. Hey, Odd Molly, thanks for joining us, and thank you for being a member and supporting the channel. Let's see if we have anything else in here. I'm going to go to the next slide. I think there's one more. Let's see. Does the meaning of witchcraft relate to alchemy? I don't think it really does. My understanding of witchcraft is pretty basic, but it seems, from my understanding, alchemy was very much the school of older men, either moneyed or they were sponsored by people with money so that they could spend all their time in a laboratory. They were sometimes seen as sorcerers or as suspicious figures, but for the most part they were charlatans, who were then chased out of town. For the most part, they seem to have been given a lot more respect than, say, the witchcraft, which witchcraft, to a certain extent, I think, was a lot of the time just female traditions. The midwife, women who knew things about life and death and treating people and taking care of them, that was seen as either suspicious by, very superstitious folks at certain periods of history, or they were not liked by the people in power because they had influence. Unfortunately, the two positions, one being male and having more money, probably, the other female and probably poor, definitely a lot more persecution of witches than of alchemists. Unless they were charlatans, which you could definitely be in trouble. Now, sometimes alchemists would hide because the idea that the alchemist was studying to try and create gold would definitely attract people of a certain level of power and money who would just up and kidnap them and force them to make gold for them. There was one guy who was kidnapped by the king and kept prisoner for like 2 years trying to force him to create gold, and when he failed, he was thrown into prison for 4 years. Eventually he was released and he died. So that was one reason to hide for sure. But I don't think they were quite as persecuted, especially in certain periods of history. Let's see, I think I saw Handsome Ratch hop in. Hey, thanks for being a member. I know it is Yeah, sometimes life sucks and we die. That is unfortunate, but hopefully none of us are doing that right now. You know, we're all here and having fun. More chances for videos on the tarot. Yes, definitely more on the tarot. Probably we could do more on Silent Hill because there are some interesting things to talk about there. The Book of Memories, which is a book about Silent Hill 1, 2, and 3, actually ties specific aspects of the games to specific cards of the tarot, not just characters, which I think is really interesting. But also it's a huge topic. I mean, all these different occult topics, you could probably go on for ages. I'm also working on researching that for Persona, because those games deal with them quite a lot. So probably more of that in the future. Somebody else did also say that they wish they were sad that I started doing the live stuff after I did the tarot video, because they would have liked to have seen that live, but we may talk about that again at some point. 3 alchemical substances relate heavily to Silent Hill 2. Angela, it represents sulfur, energy that's active. Eddie's salt, stagnation. James is a mix of both. That's an interesting take. It's salt, sulfur, and mercury, I think, were the 3 elements. There was originally 2, and then later someone added salt, and that became the 3 principles that come from the 4 elements. Let's see here. Much of Western alchemy is based on Hermeticism, a philosophy that thought every spiritual school of thought had a grain of truth to it and tried to combine them into a single body of knowledge. Yes, that's very true. Hermeticism comes from Hermes, the god of travelers and magic in Greece, which is part of where this all came from. It's also heavily influenced by Egypt, where the god Thoth, T-H-O-T-H, don't know if I'm saying that correctly, was associated with him. And those schools of thought heavily influenced alchemy and a lot of other things. It's very interesting that all these schools of thought were studied by folks and kind of fused together. Alchemy, tarot, astronomy, Kabbalah, all of them at certain points kind of intersect and influence each other. It's very fascinating. Let's see. We need to hear about Crimson Ceremony. Yes, that would be quite fun. Hey, Lynn Griffin. Hello, folks joining us. Hello, someone cool. Thank you for being a member and supporting the channel. And thank you all for joining me today. If we don't have any more questions, I'll start to wind down. I guess I can go ahead and let's jump. Well, let's see. Do we have any more? No. All right. That is the last slide. We will jump to fade to black and then... All right, let's see if my new screen is working. It is not. Damn it. I've been trying to update the stream a little bit and add some new features, one of which is supposed to be a scroll that will show all of our member names, and it does not do that right now, but I'll figure out what's wrong with that for next time. Are we going to talk about Jasper next time? So members got to vote on what the next topic would be. I think right now we're tied between the Wish House and Jasper Gain. It'll be one of those two things next time. I'm gonna have to talk to folks and see what members would like. If you'd like to become a member and support the channel, you can get a lot of bonus content, like access to years of my written works, essays on video games, fiction, nonfiction, poetry I wrote in high school, a lot of various things like that. Access to extra videos, special abilities like being able to choose video topics for essays or streams for games. You get to request things during streams, lots of extra bonus stuff. As little as $1 a month can help keep the channel alive and get you some cool stuff. Join the Discord if you haven't. We're pretty cool. We hang out and we watch anime and movies and bad horror. And you can follow me on social media as well. All those links are in the description below. Thank you again to all my Patreon and YouTube folks. Next time, hopefully the scroll will work. I need a symbolism on Laura that fucks with my understanding. Yes, I did do a video on Laura at some point that was a little speculative. She's fun. She's interesting. Eileen, we haven't done yet, but we will at some point for sure. I kind of try to balance between occult topics, character videos, locations. I try and pace them out so that we're not stuck with a certain kind of video, over and over on repeat. So yeah, I think that's everything I needed to say. This week, Thursday, we'll be doing another, probably anime watch. Maybe Saturday night, we'll do another movie. Tonight, I'll be streaming at about maybe 3:30, 4 p.m. I'll post when I go live. And Fanfic Friday will be back this Friday, with a special treat. So thanks again for joining me, everyone, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.